Rat sat alone in his nook, overlooking platform 1 of Christopher Street Station, while he nibbled on his dinner from a local deli and read a copy of the New York Times. His home was carefully concealed above the tracks so as not to be seen by other animals and to avoid the winter air that rushed through the subway with each passing train. He had finished the food section and was about to turn to the Saturday crossword when he was distracted by a squirrel stumbling down the stairs to the platform. The squirrel zigzagged down the steps and sang out of tune. Rat was annoyed that his night of reading had been disturbed. However, the squirrel was handsome, with tight pointed ears and a plump tail. His lush, minkish fur was only matched by his dark espresso eyes. The squirrel tripped and lay splayed out like roadkill. Having lived his life in the subway, Rat knew a drunk when he saw one. He also knew that if he didn't intervene, the squirrel would be robbed by a less scrupulous animal or fall onto the tracks and be squashed by a locomotive. Resting his paper and pencil down on his coffee table, he decided to coax the vulnerable animal back to the safety of his home. Checking that no other animals or trains were nearby, Rat scampered across the tracks and helped the squirrel up. The inebriated animal flinched at the touch of Rat's wiry fur. While Rat chastised himself for helping, the squirrel raised his head and gave a radiant, toothy smile. Rat knew he should smile back. However, he was terribly out of practice, as no animal is kind to a rat. Rat smirked as best he could while the squirrel introduced himself as Squirrel and explained that he had been drinking with friends. One drink had resulted in another, and another, and another. Before he knew it, he'd forgotten where home was or where he had buried his nuts. Rat's nook could best be described as a studio, as most New York City residences are. The living space was grand enough to accommodate both of them and was adorned with shiny knickknacks that Rat had proudly curated. Squirrel wandered around, inspecting Rat's belongings and complimenting him on such a beautiful home. While Rat had never entertained anyone and was apprehensive about having a guest, he lapped up the admiration. "What's this?" Squirrel asked, picking up a light-coloured stone off the mantelpiece. I borrowed it from the Met," Rat replied. "That is a loose piece of the tomb of Pernod. Be careful, that's nearly 4,000 years old." Squirrel put the stone back on the mantelpiece without any acknowledgement of the rareness of the antiquity and moved on to the next item that caught his attention. Eventually, Squirrel became tired and curled himself up on a beanbag. Rat eased himself into his chair and pretended to read as Squirrel fell asleep. Squirrel snored sweetly, and Rat dozed with the warmth of having done a good deed. By the time Squirrel woke, Rat had already gone for his morning stroll and returned with a blueberry bagel. The dining room table was set with the bagel divided evenly and a napkin beside each half. Squirrel bounded over to grab a piece with both paws. I'm starving," Squirrel announced as he thrust his face into his breakfast. Rat sat quietly, breaking off pieces and politely chewing. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Oh, I'm great, and thank you for last night," Squirrel replied. "This is nice. We should do this more often." "Why?" Rat asked, his whiskers twitching. "Will you let me sleep in your home? And you're so..." Squirrel searched for the word. "Interesting. How about it?" From that morning on, Rat and Squirrel met each week at a specific tree. The meeting time and place was each Sunday, mid-afternoon, at a red maple opposite a pub. Squirrel had picked the meeting time because his friends were usually busy on Sunday nights, and Rat picked the location because that tree smelt like the animals that had stumbled out of the pub and relieved themselves before going home. In Rat's opinion, it was the most eclectic scent of pee in the city. Rat looked forward to their weekly outings and often planned them well in advance. He deemed it essential to provide Squirrel with a cultural education filled with theatre, museums, ballet, opera, and the New York Philharmonic. Despite Squirrel's apparent enjoyment at each outing, he occasionally showed up late, and sometimes not at all. Rat paced around the tree each week until the sunset before trudging home to plan the next outing. If Squirrel hadn't shown up the week before, he'd offer a variation on a similar explanation. "I took a date out to brunch," Squirrel would begin, "and brunch became dinner and, well, you know what New York City can be like." Rat carefully examined Squirrel's mannerisms and supposed that his confidence was from a lifetime of being adored. At home in his nook, Rat tried to strut around like Squirrel, but it was no use. His rump was fat, his eyes were beady, and his tail looked like a stripped electrical cord. As the longest nights of winter descended, Rat sat stooped on the edge of his bed, contemplating how he and Squirrel should mark Rat's birthday. He flicked through the New Yorker and landed on a superb review for a new bakery. He lay down on his bed to read the article, but was distracted by his coat, which had begun to get shabby with old age. Setting the magazine down, he rubbed his knees. His arthritis was noticeably worse. He could now not only sense an approaching storm, but an oncoming train from many stops away. Squirrel showed no signs of aging. Of course he didn't. So far as Rat could tell, Squirrel had no burdens whatsoever, least of all the wicked trick that God had played on Rat. Despite their similar size and diet, Rat only had half the life expectancy of Squirrel. This would likely be Rat's last winter, while Squirrel had many more carefree years to enjoy. Rat couldn't reconcile this unfairness, which caused him to lose sleep that night. With each passing night, his thoughts darkened until he resented Squirrel. To placate himself, Rat turned to books. He scoured his nooks for any writings that would provide a fresh perspective, but found them lacking. With his personal collection failing him, he knew he could rely on one public institution for help, the New York Public Library. Late at night, Rat ascended from the subway and onto Fifth Avenue. The library had been closed for hours, but it was easy for him to access the treasure trove of knowledge. The security system was poor, and the security guards were retired police dogs with lousy eyesight. In a world seemingly designed for any other animal than a rat, being able to infiltrate public buildings without much effort was one of the few perks. On gaining access to the Row's main reading room, Rat hobbled through the rows of books, squinting at the titles that ran down the spines. The shelves were packed tightly with the greatest books ever written, yet nothing resonated with his torment until he found himself in the philosophy section. Rat stopped at what he recognized as being the seminal books on the meaning of life. When he was sure there were no security dogs nearby, he pulled a bundle of the books from the shelf and read them under the arched windows with the lights of skyscrapers flooding in. A few weeks later, Rat and Squirrel met at their usual maple tree to celebrate Rat's birthday at the bakery. As they walked, Squirrel hummed the tune of Happy Birthday as Rat thought about the books on philosophy and his few years on Earth. In general, he had no regrets about his life. Indeed, it was quite the opposite. Using his small stature, he had snuck into events that most rats didn't care about and most animals could only dream of. He'd attended the Tony Awards, witnessed jazz at Carnegie Hall, wandered through the MoMA innumerable times, and seen many an aging artist do their final hurrah at Madison Square Garden. Squirrel hadn't done any of this. He was a fool. Yet the afternoon sun made Squirrel's face glow in a way that made Rat burn with envy. When they arrived at the bakery, they sat in an alley with a serving of pastries. Rat had lost his appetite, but Squirrel relished each treat, leaving croissant flecks in his whiskers with each bite into the crispy outer shell. When Rat introduced Squirrel to a raspberry Danish, Squirrel moaned in ecstasy. What did the New York magazine say about this place? Squirrel asked as Rat pushed his pastry to the side. The New Yorker described it as an exquisite culinary exploration demarcated of any pretentiousness. Squirrel peered into the fluffy inner of his baked good. He replied. I would have written, "This bakery is awesome." As the frost of winter receded, Rat continued to plot their weekly outings. He had found the most beautiful spot in the city to observe the sunset, and on the first clear Sunday, Rat and Squirrel made their way toward the Hudson River. Sitting on the curb of the West Side Highway, Rat squinted at the sun's reflection, blazing off the water. The evening peak hour traffic rumbled behind them. The sun touched the horizon and glimmered like the embers of a bin fire. It was stunning. Rat turned to Squirrel to obtain his approval, but Squirrel's eyes darted in every direction but the sunset. The two animals sat in silence until Rat pulled from under his arm a cloth parcel of seed he had brought from home. Squirrel pretended not to notice it until the cloth was unwound and the bundle of seed was cupped in both of Rat's paws. Squirrel said something silly like nice or yummy before plunging his claw into the seed. Squirrel chewed with his mouth open, smacking his lips together in delight. The wind caressed Squirrel's fur, and the remaining evening light shimmered off his eyes. Rat furrowed his brow, waiting for Squirrel to turn to him for more. The traffic continued to whirl behind them. Without looking at Rat, Squirrel reached for the seed. It wasn't there. Rat sat with a twisted grin as he held the seed over his opposite shoulder. Predictably, Squirrel protested. Rat soaked up the feeling of being needed. For a brief moment, he was a provider, a hunter with a dependent. It was just a sack of seed, yet he was the one with and Squirrel was the one without. He stared into Squirrel's eyes and found no frustration, no judgment, and no opinion. Rat wondered what it must be like to occupy such a simple mind. You only want the seed, don't you? Rat passed the seed between his front paws and held Squirrel's dim-witted eyes. Thrusting his paws downward and then up, he threw the seed over his head and onto the roadway. Squirrel was first to break his gaze. He glanced over his shoulder to see where the seed had gone. Rat knew Squirrel would be confused. What he didn't know was whether Squirrel was stupid enough to go out on the highway. This section of the roadway was challenging to access without a vehicle, even for a rodent. Cars, buses, trucks, and taxis flew past. Squirrel turned back to Rat, his eyes still vacant. Rat had thought about this moment. He stared back at Squirrel, giving no hint to Squirrel as to what he should do. Rat wanted to play with Squirrel and see his mind solve a problem of consequence. If God is prepared to play with my life, I'm prepared to play with Squirrel's. Squirrel bounded onto the roadway and scurried with electrifying pace, picking up as much seed as possible. He wasn't looking at the oncoming traffic. In the distance, An onslaught of automobiles barreled down the roadway with a truck leading the charge. Rat's eyes widened as his furry friend risked everything for some seed he was prepared to throw in a dumpster. Had Squirrel really jumped onto the roadway without so much as giving it a second thought? Rat told himself that it would be Squirrel's fault if he got hit. It was Squirrel's decision, or at the very least, he had in some way forced Rat to throw the seed. Squirrel picked up and clung to as much seed as he could. Each passing second bore heavily upon Rat as aches and pains seared through his body. Rat had only contemplated Squirrel's sudden death or a refusal to go out on the roadway. Unable to watch, he returned to the remaining sun flickering in the distance. The vibrations of the approaching truck permeated through Rat. He ground his teeth together as he waited for the sound of a horn or Squirrel's squeal and a soft thud. Rat tried to push the image out of his mind and replace it with the memory of how peacefully Squirrel had slept in the nook on the first night that they had met. Surely Squirrel will jump back to the curb, won't he? As Rat looked back up the roadway, he felt Squirrel's silky coat brush up against him, and they sat side by side again. Squirrel shoveled the seed into his mouth with gusto as the truck hurtled behind them, bringing along the cool evening air. Rat could feel the breeze touching every drop of sweat across his near-soaked body. He felt a heaviness in his chest. His breathing laboured until he gasped and thought that he might start sobbing. Rat snuffled his pointy nose and tried to compose himself. His paws were cold. He feared he might not sleep again. Squirrel offered Rat the seed he'd collected from the highway. But Rat was lost in his mind. His eyes glazed with tears. Rat knew he had plunged himself into the deepest circle of hell. Treachery. Squirrel prodded him playfully in the chest with the seed. "That's okay, Squirrel. You have it," said Rat. "You earned it. Please, take the rest. The seed is yours." Squirrel raised his head from the seed and gave a smile. "Thanks," said Squirrel. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Welcome to Vices and Virtues. This is the launch of a collection of stories that are being put out as a podcast starting from today. The plan for this evening is I'm going to read 5 stories. We're 1 down, so 4 to go. I'm going to read 3 stories to begin with. We're then going to take a 10-minute interlude. I'm obviously having a drink, so please help yourself to the drink station during that period. Andrea spoke a little bit about the inspiration for Vices and Virtues. I just wanted to give some context on that. I was fortunate enough that my dad was around in my early years and read me books like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and Winnie the Pooh. And I really loved those stories and falling asleep to those books. But one story stuck out to me in a way that the others didn't. And that's the story of Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. It was a book that was originally published in 1908. And one of the reasons that Wind in the Willows really connected with me is most people remember the first half of that story, right? So Toad lives in Toad Hall. Toad wants to buy an automobile, and his friends Mole and Badger advise him about the ails of technology. Don't go out and buy one. It's dangerous. You'll kill yourself. Toad goes out and buys the automobile. He crashes the automobile. And that should really be the end of the story. That's the moral of that story. But what happens is he goes in front of a court and goes in front of a magistrate, and he gets convicted by his peers and he gets sentenced to prison. It's a very strange thing to be in a children's book. What's stranger is that he then has an uprising in the prison because he hears that weasels have taken over Toad Hall. And so after breaking out of prison, He then forms a militia in the forest, takes over Toad Hall, running all of the weasels out of his home, and then that's the end of the story. And I still lose sleep over this story because I can't work out what's going on. So Andrea's absolutely correct, is that the impetus for these stories was during the pandemic. Andrea would roll over and say, "Can you tell me a bedtime story?" And so the first of these stories was about a dingo, an Australian native dog. And this native dog had moved to an affluent part of Sydney. And it was the first time that they had moved out of home. They made their home their own space. They really loved everything that they hung on the walls and the new couch that they bought from IKEA. But then she realizes that she can't pay the rent. Her job doesn't pay enough. And so she starts to prostitute herself. And it then becomes a moral quandary as to, well, how much do you really love your home? Are you prepared to sell your body to have the home that you want? And so after about 100 times of Andrea asking me to write down these stories, I did. And I joined a writing group in Hoboken. Some of you are here tonight, and I really appreciate that. And normally when you show up to a new group, you're meant to kind of keep to yourself, observe, don't stick out too much. And I showed up and I told this insane story, and I don't know why I thought it was a good idea, but it was about drag queens and drug use and my own insecurities. And the poor people that had to listen to that must have thought that I was there for a therapy session. But what I did with those stories over the course of the next couple of years is I tried to turn them into something a little bit more meaningful. So before I go back to another vices and virtues story, I'm going to share one of those stories that I've also shared at Lit Lit. This story is called A Rite of Passage. Returning from my lunch break, the office manager told me that my dog had taken a shit in the middle of the office. The office manager continued, "Don't worry, one of the other parents and I cleaned it up. We're very comfortable with that sort of thing." As we walked to the desecrated patch of carpet, I thanked her for cleaning it up and wondered what she meant by parents being immune to something so revolting. Andrea was 4 months pregnant with our first child, and we'd read every parenting book we could get our hands on. I was yet to find a passage about parents losing their sense of smell. Wanting to learn more, I turned to society's most trusted advisor, Google. There I learned that some parents didn't find their baby's bowel movements to be offensive. Seizing the opportunity, I considered myself a test subject and began keeping notes in a journal of my relationship with number twos. When Audrey arrived in the world, I eagerly rolled up my sleeves to change as many diapers as possible. While my wife grew anxious about Audrey not having gone for multiple days, I counted each day as a blessing. When the pandemic hit, we moved to a larger house, and over our first few months in our new home, I noticed the water levels in our toilets becoming unusually low. As I walked to the living room to discuss the matter with Andrea, I noticed a fountain of dark liquid in our backyard. Assuming we hadn't struck it rich and moved into a house on an oil field, I ran to the backyard to take a look at the geyser of sewage. The dog was already poised at the edge of the water, lapping up the ever-expanding oasis like an animal on an African safari. My first call was to our municipality, where a lady told me they'd dispatch someone in the next 24 hours. "Can you get them here faster?" I pleaded as I looked out the window in time to catch the lemon tree being fertilised. "Yeah, I'll tell them it's a health hazard, as you have young kids in the house. When they show up, just say they're taking a nap." "But I do have a baby in the house," I explained. "And she is taking a nap." The lady paused before responding. "Glad to hear you're willing to play ball." As Audrey got older and her movements became solid, I couldn't believe the size she was able to produce. Having watched my wife with a high degree of effort give birth, I will only watch in awe that a 3-year-old was able to deliver game day footballs without a midwife. I found an online chat group of parents sharing similar stories. One parent wrote a blog about breaking up his 12-year-old's handiwork so as not to block the pipes. This later search had me wondering whether I needed to keep a fireplace tool set beside the toilet. Toilet brushes broke up the logs, but clumps would get stuck in the bristles. If I was going to play this game for the next decade, perhaps I'd be better off with tongs and a fire poker. On a visit to Audrey's preschool, I was tempted to ask another dad about this curious rite of passage. The two of us were waiting outside the bathroom for our daughters to finish. The other girl came out first, bustling through the door and running into her dad's arms. "I did a poopy," she announced with glee. "Sorry," said the dad. "She likes to announce when she does it on her own." Audrey was next through the bathroom door. She stopped short of the three of us, ensuring she had everyone's attention. "Dad, I think we need the plunger." Later that week, I supervised Audrey while she took her evening bathtub. She rollicked with laughter as I turned on the jacuzzi jets. As she put bubbles in her hair, crafted a Santa-like beard, and baked cakes with her bathtub toys, it was a perfect father-daughter moment. As my wife entered the bathroom, she stumbled back from the doorway, complaining of the stench. I drained the bath to find that not only had Audrey muddied her bathwater, but the jets had sucked the foreign items through the filter and pureed it back into the water. Tiny clumps of breakfast and brown confetti covered my sweet little girl and every inch of the tub. As I scrubbed the bathroom with bleach and an old toothbrush, I couldn't help but smile that my transformation was complete. Thinking back to the words of the office manager and reflecting on my journal entries, my advice to new parents is to be prepared with the phone number of a good plumber, carry plenty of diapers, learn how to use a plunger, and try to stay off the internet. You will need courage on this unpredictable pilgrimage, as it really needs to be seen, smelt, and scrubbed to truly understand. Thank you. So we're going to get back to the Vices and Virtues collection now. I was really naive when I started off on this process. I'd never written a book before. I'd had meanderings and scribble, but I'd never really tried to produce something that I could put out for a public audience. And so in about September of last year, I had one good story, which was Rat and Squirrel that you just heard, and I had 9 other stories in various stages of draft. And some of those stories were okay. I had one story about a lion who needed to explain to his son, Cub, that he was getting a divorce. And given that there had been so many stories by Disney and Pixar and Illumination and so forth about love and about marriage, about staying together forever, I thought it was a great morality tale. Some of the other drafts were terrible. I had one story which had put a wolf as being the president of the United States, and his ego had become so large that he didn't get out of bed anymore. He just sat in bed and masturbated all day. It wasn't going to fit in this canon of stories. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring them something closer to Aesop's fables. And one of the central themes around each of these stories are moral teachings or fables or fairy tales and Grimm's tables and so forth. And I wanted to reimagine those in a way that was meaningful, not just for kids, but for adults as well. The idea that came to mind was when I thought about The Three Little Pigs is it's a great story about, putting your foundations in place and making sure that you have everything secure in your life, and that will lead to longevity. What it doesn't tell the story of is how expensive it is to buy property in Beacon, how much you're going to get banged out for contractors in the process of building that house, and who the wolf is in our society these days. And so I wanted to make sure that we had a modern lens on each of these stories. This story is called The Tortoise and the Pigeon. Standing on his hind legs at the edge of Central Park's lake, Tortoise leaned over the water's edge and shuddered at his reflection. In the 2 weeks since the mugging, he hadn't left his apartment. His eyes were like stones poked into a sullen face, and his complexion had developed a greyish hue. Tortoise heard the pat, pat, pat of steps approaching from behind. His heart raced as he gripped the knife in his pocket. He turned as a hare dressed in running gear bounded down the concrete path toward him. Tortoise was sure he was about to be attacked again, but the hare rushed past and sprinted over Bow Bridge. Beneath its white archway, rowboats emerged, filled with smiling morning tourists. No one was coming for him. No one seemed to notice him at all. When would he be relieved of his burden of fearing everything? His sense of self had been shattered since that late night in Midtown. The mugger was a large cat that wore a ski mask to conceal his identity. He shoved Tortoise to the sidewalk and pressed the tip of a gun into his soft belly. "You want to live? Don't move." The cat snarled, snatching Tortoise's wallet and phone while he cowered in his shell. When Tortoise got home, he winced as he cleaned his bloody scrapes from being forced to the ground. Those had since healed, but the nightmares that left him drenched in sweat remained. Today, Tortoise mustered only enough courage to leave his apartment, buy a coffee and walk around the lake. His eyes darted around to ensure no one else was approaching. On the grassy area away from the lake, a bevy of swans squawked and laughed as they clutched at their designer purses and adjusted their hatpins. The elegant birds seemed only interested in each other. Tortoise released his grip on the knife and sipped his coffee, feeling too afraid to appreciate anything but its bitterness. A pigeon walked toward the swans with his wings tucked into the pockets of a tattered old trench coat. The swans honked hysterically and flapped their wings. "Get a job!" hissed one. The pigeon hurried back to the path towards Tortoise. Tortoise's knees shook as he reached for the knife once more. "Hey, cooed Pigeon. "Spare a dollar?" I don't have any change." "Figures," said Pigeon. "Slim pickings this morning." Look. I don't want any trouble, please." "Me neither, brother," replied Pigeon. "Life's hard enough without looking for trouble. I had a cousin who was terribly unhappy. Lives in Florida now, among the fancy flamingos and pelicans of the South." "That's nice, but I need to get going," said Tortoise, hurrying across the path and onto the grass. Pigeon followed Tortoise. "My cousin packed up his apartment in the city, moved to Miami, called me the other day, say he was happy as a clam. Or maybe he was eating clams. Or maybe he was clammy. Anyway, as soon as he got some sun on the old beak, he was as pleased as a woodpecker at a Christmas tree convention." Tortoise stopped and chuckled. "Look up," continued Pigeon. "We've got the same sun sitting over our heads. Nothing better than sunshine to cure whatever ails you. Take a load off and join me." Pigeon's trench coat splayed out around him as he sat, displaying the full array of stains and holes that marked his garment. He patted the grass beside him, beckoning Tortoise to sit. Tortoise started toward the path. "Maybe another time." "You got somewhere to be?" Pigeon asked as he reclined to lay on the grass. Tortoise thought about his bed sheets, probably still damp from his night terrors. "No," murmured Tortoise, softening his grip on the knife. "I guess not." He placed his coffee on the ground and sat next to Pigeon. "Now, continued Pigeon. Lay down, close your eyes. Tortoise lay on his back, exposing his soft underside. A swan honked, and Tortoise instinctively rolled over and pulled his head into his shell. Ah, come now, called Pigeon, his beak tapping the top of the shell. Never mind those glorified geese. Get out of here. Tortoise peeked his head out to see that the swans were paying no attention to Tortoise or Pigeon. Pigeon lay next to him with his eyes closed. Can't let them swans tell you how to live your life, said Pigeon. Now come on, let's get some of that vitamin D on your face. Tortoise again rolled onto his back, letting his neck and claws relax. His tummy warmed as he stretched out his legs. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath and holding it momentarily before letting the air rush from his body. The sounds of the city fell away. Tortoise woke to a cool breeze across his face. As his eyes adjusted to the brightness, he sat up. His wallet, phone, and keys were still on him. His knife was in his pocket. Tortoise breathed a sigh of relief. You want some? Asked Pigeon, holding out a half-eaten muesli bar. Sorry, said Tortoise, standing and brushing away clinging leaves and grass clippings. I must have dozed off. Tortoise wondered whether Pigeon had remained next to him the whole time he'd been asleep, watching over him and keeping him safe. You really punched out some Z's there, pal, said Pigeon as he took another bite of his snack. I should probably head home, Tortoise replied. You live in the city? Said Pigeon. What? Said Tortoise. Well, if you are, the Met's free to New York residents. Makes me feel better on my worst days. Tortoise held his claw to his forehead to shield the midday sun. The tip of the Met's beige building sat above the tree line in the distance. Undoubtedly, there would be a crowd of larger, stronger animals. Tortoise felt safer in the company of Pigeon. Do you want to come with me? Asked Tortoise. I was there yesterday, said Pigeon. And they don't like fellas like me there every day. Tortoise stared at his feet, hesitating to go alone. Go on, get, said Pigeon, flapping his wings. None of this slow and steady business. Trust me, you'll be all right. Tortoise picked up his coffee and ambled across the grass to the path. His body was still warm from the sun, and the rhythm of his heart had slowed. He smiled to see bright red cardinal flowers blossoming from the water's edge. Maybe the works of the Met would touch him as well. There was nothing beautiful waiting for him in his apartment. When he arrived at the Met, Tortoise stood before the imposing limestone building and its hulking wooden doors. Beyond the doors was a security checkpoint with metal detectors and an X-ray machine for personal items. Security guards scrutinized each entrant. Tortoise placed his claw back on the knife. He'd have to relinquish the weapon if he wanted to enter. Tortoise shuffled back and forth on the granite steps as he considered whether to go home or toss the knife away. As he watched the cheerful animals coming and going from the entranceway, it felt foolish to deny himself whatever joy lay inside. The grandeur of the Met beckoned him in. Each gallery room would likely be staffed with additional security. He stashed the knife in a nearby bush, knowing the Met was one of the safest places in the city. Tortoise caught the elevator to the second floor. He sauntered through the gallery until he came across framed canvases of heroic lions with powerful legs, sharp teeth, and a ferocity in their eyes. He bustled through the room, feeling the glare of every apex predator bearing down on him. In the adjoining gallery, portraits of ghostly-looking animals watched him from the walls. Their pale, sinewy faces were a haunting reminder of death and the afterlife. Feeling hopeless, Tortoise noticed a painting with a dark blue geometric pattern. He went over for a closer inspection. The painting was of a tortoise sitting at a drab wooden table, with a stale loaf of bread held by one gnarly claw. The other claw was reaching for an old ceramic jug. The tortoise's neck was painted crooked, with profound lines of age etched into them. He wore a dark blue neckerchief tied around the top of his shell, and a sagging stevedore's cap rested on his head. The figure's eyes reminded Tortoise of his own. The artwork evoked the anguish Tortoise had experienced ever since the robbery. He'd sat alone in his apartment for so many days, barely noticing his surroundings or tasting his food. How had the painter so perfectly captured the demons that tormented him? He continued to stare at the painting and spotted the exhibit label next to it. Amongst the details, the label stated that the tortoise was blind. The tortoise in the artwork seemed so much more vulnerable for not having its sight. Tortoise thought of how afraid he'd been since the night of the mugging. Knowing he wasn't the only one to experience fear and cruelty comforted him. It didn't matter at what distance Tortoise stood from the painting. The portrait had a depth he could feel in his bones. Tortoise sat on a bench and studied the image. He took deep breaths and felt his muscles relax. He placed his hands in his pockets and realized he didn't instinctively reach for his knife. He no longer needed it. When the intercom announced the Met was closing, he went to the Met's cafe and ordered 2 coffees, one for himself and one for Pigeon. Tortoise meandered back towards the lake, which now looked like an impressionist painting. Ripples of water from the rowboats were softened and distorted by the sunlight, and the moss and the water lilies became delicate dabs of paint. Pigeon wasn't sitting in the grass. Tortoise placed the coffee cups on the ground and climbed onto a rock to get a better view of the park. Beyond the swans, a beaver sat on a bench cradling her screaming baby, rocking back and forth to appease her kit. The mother threw her head back, seemingly in despair, as the baby spat its pacifier onto the ground and began crying louder. Tortoise called out to the swans, "Have you seen Pigeon?" "Pigeon? The police came and shooed him away," said a swan. "Why?" said Tortoise, getting down from the rock. "Why? Pigeons are nothing but a nuisance." Tortoise looked around, hoping the swan was mistaken, while knowing how impossible it would be to find one special pigeon among all the pigeons of New York City. He'd only known Pigeon for a few hours, yet the time they'd spent together had left him feeling more like himself. Tortoise was grateful for Pigeon's intrusion into his life. The baby beaver squealed. Tortoise picked up the 2 coffees and walked past the swans to the beavers. The kit was wrapped tightly in a blue blanket with tiny logs stitched into the fabric. The baby stopped screaming and watched Tortoise sit on the bench beside them. The mother clutched her baby closer to her chest. Tortoise recognized the fear and frustration in her eyes. "Hi," said Tortoise, raising the spare cup in his claw. "Would you like a coffee?" Thank you. So to finish us off for the evening, I'm going to tell 2 more stories. I'm going to tell one of my short essays, and then we're going to finish with one of the stories from Vices and Virtues. This is an essay called A Man Moving. After finishing law school, it was time to move out of my mum's house in the suburbs. A childhood friend, Steve-O, and I drove around Sydney, Australia to look at rental apartments in my 1989 Honda Accord. Between inspections, we would smoke cigarettes that we lit from a faulty push-in, pop-out lighter in the centre console. After it had heated to a red-hot flammable temperature, the lighter would fly out of the centre console and into the carpeted footwells, prompting Steve-O to yell, We've got a live grenade in here. Realising Steve-O might not make the best roommate, I moved in with my girlfriend Jemima and a friend named Andy. Steve-O was annoyed at my choice, but insisted on helping me move. When the day of the move arrived, I didn't appreciate how effective it would have been to possess basic items like boxes or packing tape. Instead, Steve-O tossed garbage bags of my possessions into the back of a U-Haul between his many smoke breaks. My only admonishment was when I caught him running down the driveway with an IKEA floor lamp perched over his shoulder as he launched it into the back of the truck like a javelin. With Steve-O out of the way, Jemima, Andy and I merged our lives and kitchenware as best we could. Each frying pan produced a unique flavour. Every piece of Tupperware tasted like red pasta sauce. Living with a girlfriend for the first time was a learning experience, as I was banned from using the face soap for consistently being caught using it south of my belly button. Thankfully, we had Andy as a common enemy, with his bicycle parked in the living room and his steadfast belief that men should be allowed to use flushable baby wipes. Andy moved out the following year, and Jemima followed shortly after that. Broken-hearted and with no one to split the rent with, I called Steve-O to see if he was available. He was keen, but he was also in a legal dispute with his landlord for a party he'd held that required the presence of 8 police cars. I packed up my belongings and moved 700 miles south to Melbourne. My new flatmates were a lesbian couple from Canada. I was a lawyer, in my mid-20s, in a new city, and had no friends. The Canadian couple took pity on me when I was questioned about the state of my room. It was spotless, but I had to explain that Jemima had taken all of the bedding in the breakup and that I was just as comfortable in a sleeping bag. The following week, with me still in my sleeping bag, the Canadian couple excitedly asked me if I was willing to be their sperm donor. We discussed the proposition over a bottle of Southern Comfort and agreed that this was a win-win. They were in a loving relationship and wanted a child, and I was in no state to bring life into the world. Shortly after this arrangement was reached, I met my now wife Andrea while vacationing in New York. Andrea moved to Australia and suggested that the offer of free semen with no guardrails concerning parenting or child support was not her idea of a great long-term plan. Instead, Andrea and I got a dog, moved to a new apartment, planned a wedding, had a baby, just in time for a pandemic. Hard lockdown suited us as we drank booze every night and critiqued amateur dancers on TikTok. We enjoyed learning how to parent on our own, and to Andrea's delight, her prayers were answered when my mother was prohibited by law from stepping foot in our house. After 245 days in hard lockdown, our move to America truly felt like we were moving to the land of the free. Unknowingly, we'd relocated to the US with only the clothes on our backs as our shipping container took over 9 months to arrive. Fresh off another move, we were sleeping with our mattress on the floor. I considered this to be the authentic American migrant experience. And, like so many before me, dreamt the American dream. The next day, I purchased as many lottery tickets as possible for the $1 billion Powerball. When my premonitions proved erroneous, I started my next frivolous spending habit by purchasing a taxidermied raccoon in a top hat. To our now 4-year-old's delight, she cheerily says hello to the raccoon every morning, and my study now resembles an additional chamber to the Museum of Natural History. Moving has punctuated the highs and lows of my adult life, giving pause to chaos and bringing forth new opportunities. I don't know when or where we will move next, but I look forward to the next adventure with Andrea, our children, and our menagerie of animals. I just won't be asking Steve-O for help. Thank you. So we've got one more story for tonight. It's going to be from the Vices and Virtues collection. And I'd like to welcome a very special guest to the stage. So her recent film, Tulip Street, premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. She stars as Claire in a comedy series, Stand-Ins, that she created with her friend, and it premiered at the Catalyst Story Institute Film Festival. She's appeared in many other TV productions and off-Broadway productions. Please welcome to the stage, Amy White. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well.
This is fun. You enjoying Beacon?
I'm enjoying Beacon so much. We've had a lovely time. We've had a lovely drink.
Excellent. Good to hear. Do you want to read this story with me?
I would love to.
Let's do that. This story is called The Poodle and the Retriever.
Poodle stood at Retriever's hospital room doorway, taking deep breaths to compose herself. She was relieved he'd pulled through the bypass surgery, but there was something else bothering her, like a flea. "You can do this," she told herself, and she entered the room. She couldn't help but shudder when she saw her husband splayed out on his back, the hospital gown barely covering his bulging stomach, and the slim bed narrowly holding his girth. Squares of golden fur had been shaved from his body, replaced with tubes and a blood-speckled bandage stuck to his chest. An ID bag hung from a metal stand, delivering nutrients for his recovery. She put her handbag under the bedside table, pulled a chair by his side, and leaned over the railing to kiss his forehead. His eyes fluttered.
Where am I? Retriever thought as the room came into focus. A cold, white, fluorescent light hung directly above him and stung his eyes. He tried to piece together what he remembered, but his memory was as foggy as his eyesight. Am I dead? He thought. Do all dogs go to heaven?
"Tiny, can you hear me?" Poodle whispered. She placed her paw on top of his and noticed that his nails needed to be cut. "I wish you'd come with me to the nail salon and get these trimmed properly," she thought. "I'm sure he only goes to the $10 washing room at the mall to get out of grocery shopping."
I don't think this is heaven, Retriever thought. For starters, the sheets are thin and rough, not like our pure cotton ones at home. The anesthesia clouded any memory from earlier that day. Let's see, he thought. I was climbing the stairs at home and... Wait a minute. There was an ambulance and... Oh no, what's that horrible smell? Am I in a hospital? His nostrils tingled at the scent of clinical-grade disinfectant, but his vision improved, and the cloudy figure beside him formed a dark silhouette of a round head with long, fluffy ears. Thank God, he thought. Poodle is here.
Poodle noticed the distress on his face. "It's okay," she whispered to him. "You're in the hospital." Poor thing. He has had such an acute sense of smell, she thought. He won't like it when I tell him he needs to be in here for a while. She pulled her phone from her pocket to message the boxers next door who were watching their 7 puppies and saw a medley of sympathetic messages from family and friends. Too exhausted to read or respond to them, she only texted the boxers, "Visiting hours finish soon. I'll give you money for pizzas. Thanks."
Retriever loathed the hospital room, the constraining railings on the bed, the plain beige walls, the intimidating panel of switches above his head, and the crummy old television that hung from the ceiling. Tubes pulled at every pore, and one poked up his nose. My throat feels so dry and sore, he thought. It's like I've swallowed a tennis ball. Retriever tried to speak. Instead, he made a gurgling noise that sounded like a growl. Clearing his throat, he tried again, but his voice was wispy and full words failed him. What? He wheezed. What?
What is it, boy? Poodle asked as she looked around the room. Walk? Do you want to go for a walk? Not right now, honey. You've had a heart attack and just come out of surgery. He has got to be kidding, she thought. Years of nearly no exercise, but on the day he has a heart attack, he wants to go walkies. I've been telling him to take better care of himself ever since the arrival of the puppies. It's like he wants me to beg.
Retriever shook his head. Swallowing hard, he tried once more. Water! Water!
That makes more sense, Poodle thought as she reached for the jug of water on the bedside table. She poured him a glass and held it to his lips while she spoke to him. You scared me today. You were panting at the top of the stairs, and then you fell and barked, "My heart! My heart!" And then you blacked out. She gasped, a spasmodic breath as she relived the day. Calling the ambulance, moving his unconscious body, sending the puppies next door, waiting in silence for the paramedics to arrive, the screaming siren as they rode in the back of the ambulance, and then hours, wondering whether he was still alive.
Thanks, Retriever huffed with a dopey smile. Through the pain of his stitches, his belly rumbled. Food? Is there food?
Food? Really? After what he's put me through, she thought. No, thank you. No, I'm glad you're here. No, I love you. Is he seriously asking for something to eat? I warned him that something like this would happen if he didn't lose weight. She held back her frustration as her eyes met his. I'm sorry, said Poodle, her voice icy. I didn't quite hear what you said.
Why does she look so angry? Retriever thought. Perhaps she couldn't hear my scratchy voice. I'll try again with manners, that was the problem. Could you see if there's any food, please?
And here I was, under the impression that retrievers were intelligent, she thought. Instead of being grateful for being alive, he's wrapped himself in his bedsheet, commanding me to fetch him a meal. If they bring him food today, he's not getting any sweets. I don't care if they're serving Jell-O or there's little cups of pudding he likes. The diet starts now. Poodle stood up and straightened Retriever's bedsheet so he wasn't in such a tangle. I'm sorry, she said. They're not serving dinner right now.
Dinner? Retriever thought. He looked at the wall clock. Nearly 8. Last he remembered it was Saturday morning. Poodle sat beside him with her lip curling at the edges. Are you okay? He asked. She's always okay, even-keeled in ways that I don't understand, he thought. Prepares breakfast for the family and drops the pups at school every morning, works all day and ensures dinner is on the table.
Am I okay? My husband had a heart attack, snarled Poodle. Doesn't he remember all those dinner parties where he stuffed himself full of food and writhed around in bed with a tummy ache? I tried to control his portion size, only to watch him go to the pantry and help himself to treats throughout the day. How can you even think of food now?
Poodle's tone made Retriever want to sit up and offer her a paw. He shuffled his butt to the middle of the bed and used the remote to elevate his head. As the bed whirred under his weight, he could feel the stitches in his chest tightening and stopped. He reached out, but she ignored him, staring at her laugh. Poodle is so good to me, he thought. I don't tell her often enough how much I appreciate her. She never complains. It's not in her temperament. Hey, said Retriever. I'll be better in no time.
Spending the day in a hospital will break a dog's spirit. Poodle could hardly look at Retriever. His belly was so round that it looked like he belonged in the maternity ward rather than the intensive care unit. He never listened to me, she thought. I sent him all those social media posts about coronary disease being the #1 killer of dogs his age. But he never paid attention, too busy responding to every cat meme with a growl emoji. Now you put yourself in the hospital, she said.
Put myself in the hospital, Retriever yelped. I may have put on a few pounds, but it's mostly my winter coat, he thought. This isn't my fault. Heart attacks are hereditary. Besides, when your time is up, your time is up. And clearly, my time isn't up yet. We should be celebrating with some drinks and those delicious little tubs of pudding they probably serve at mealtime. I just need those little treats at the end of a long day, said Retriever. They bring me joy.
Poodle stared incredulously at Retriever. Little treats? Do you think we're talking about little treats? What about Christmas dinner when you ate 5 servings, including a string of sausages that gave you indigestion? Did that bring you, what did you call it? Joy? Her mind ran through the innumerable other times he'd gorged himself. Thanksgiving dinner when he vomited from the sheer volume of food that he'd eaten, and last year's Super Bowl where he ate an entire tray of spicy nachos, fell asleep in the second half, missed the game-winning touchdown, and had acid reflux for a week.
Maybe I overdid it at Christmas, Retriever admitted, and my metabolism isn't what it used to be. Poodle's an excellent chef, he thought. Of course I want seconds at every meal. Didn't everyone? She wouldn't want me to miss out on extra servings of her grandma's special stuffing recipe.
You never exercise, said Poodle.
It's hard to find the time. I'd go for a run after work, said Retriever, but the doctor told me I have the rickety hips of an old German Shepherd.
Poodle instinctively pulled away from Retriever in disbelief. This is not the dog that I married, she thought. Yes, our bodies have changed. I know that better than he does. I pushed out 7 puppies, spilled them, and have the stretched nipples to prove it. What happened to the Retriever who used to happily chase a frisbee all afternoon? You could try swimming at the gym again, Poodle suggested. I could get you a free mug using a different email address.
Retriever appreciated her thriftiness, but the chlorine in the pool stripped away his coat's natural oils. Whatever he'd save in gym fees, he'd likely spend on trips to the groomer at the mall. No, he replied. Thanks anyway.
Well, you have to do something, Poodle barked. Why don't you talk to the boxers next door? He trains at the gym every morning. You could be, gym buddies. Poodle's mind drifted to her morning routine. At 8:15 each morning, Poodle watched through her kitchen window as Boxer pulled into his driveway and got out of his car, wearing a tight-fitting athleisure and dripping with sweat from the gym. He had such a nice tushy on him. Oh, she'd love to get a little sniff.
Retriever tucked his tail between his legs and turned away from Poodle. Here we go, he thought, bringing up Boxer next door again. It wasn't fair. He's retired and his puppies have all left for college. Plus, a boxer is naturally lean and muscly. Boxer, it's in the name. I'm tired, said Retriever through clenched teeth.
Poodle pushed her seat back and stood, swallowing hard to get the words out. I've had it, Retriever. I'm not going through this again. You're still in a critical state and you're digging yourself an early grave. I know what you'll say. When your time is up, blah, blah, blah. It's not good enough. Get your acts together. For me For the pup? Poodle trailed off into sobs. We've built a life together, she thought. I can't imagine raising the puppies on my own. When she pictured moving back to her parents for help, she cried even harder.
Oh, jeez, Retriever thought. I can barely sit up. What does she want from me? He tried to look over the edge of the bed where Poodle was wailing, but it made the stitches on his chest hurt to roll to the side. He helplessly lay on the gurney, unable to console his wife.
Poodle pulled a tissue from her pocket and dabbed at her eyes. She stood at his bedside as stoically as she could muster. Promise me you'll make a change. Please.
Sure, Retriever replied all too quickly. He knew he'd said the wrong thing as soon as he said it. When the single syllable hit Poodle's ears, she bared her teeth.
Sure, she snapped back.
Retriever's mind scrambled like a dog on a shiny floor for something to diffuse the situation. He wanted to tell her that he loved her. He was indebted to her in ways words couldn't explain. Not just for today, but for who she was. Her spirit, her essence, her soul made his life better. Retriever held back a smile as he remembered the first time he gave her flowers. When he'd handed them to her, a bee flew out of the bouquet and nearly stung her on the nose. Poodle laughed and told him they were the most memorable flowers she had ever received. Reminding her of that story would have to wait for a better moment when they both felt better. I'll tell her tomorrow, he thought to himself. Things will be better tomorrow. I'll try anything, said Retriever. Perhaps there's a drug, one of those new weight loss pills they're always advertising.
Poodle knew that drugs weren't the answer, and crouched at the foot of the bed, hiding behind the clipboard of medical notes to collect her thoughts. Her anger gave way to exasperation. He needed her unconditional support, but couldn't he do a little for himself? Or was he too much a creature of comfort, too old to learn new tricks? She stood and walked to the side of his bed. His eyes held a sadness she'd never seen before. This was a moment for Poodle to say something reassuring. Perhaps, it will be okay, sweetie, or you can do it. Every word felt disingenuous. Instead, they gazed into each other's eyes in silence as an old Irish wolfhound entered the room holding a clipboard. This is the surgeon, said Poodle.
For once, Retriever was happy to see a member of the medical profession. The surgeon had straggly black and white fur with a grave face. His haggard appearance gave him an air of authority that one could only hope for from their doctor. You're fortunate, Retriever, said the surgeon, pulling a pair of glasses from his pocket. Instead of wearing them, he waved them like a conductor as he spoke. Your wife did a great job of getting you here as quickly as she did. Thanks, sweetie, said Retriever as he looked across to Poodle. She didn't turn to face him. Good as new, right, Doc? Asked Retriever. The surgeon explained how he'd taken a blood vessel from Retriever's leg and grafted it into his chest to allow blood to flow to his heart. When the surgeon outlined Retriever's treatment plan, Retriever's tummy rumbled and he stopped paying attention. The surgeon rambled on while Poodle took notes. Retriever, said the surgeon, you need to understand that your condition is still serious. This is very important. Retriever nodded. He tried to pay attention, but his belly wouldn't let him. He just wanted to go home. He knew he'd fully recover with Poodle's help as she continued taking notes. As the surgeon turned to leave, he asked Retriever, he told Retriever they'd likely keep him at the hospital for most of the week until he was stable. He also reminded them that visiting hours were over. Poodle thanked the surgeon, and Retriever waved.
Did you listen to any of that? Poodle asked. As he looked back at her sheepishly, she kissed him on the forehead once more before grabbing her handbag. She didn't want to be in the same room as her husband anymore. "Rest up, honey," she whispered as she headed to the door. When Chloe woke the following day, she saw a missed call from what looked like the hospital. "Probably Retriever called to apologize," she thought. Poodle made her morning coffee and stood in the house's front window as the puppies scampered around upstairs to get ready for school. Annoyingly for Poodle, the puppies descended on the kitchen for breakfast before Boxer arrived. Once she dropped the puppies at school, she would turn to the hospital. As she strode through the waiting room, a nurse intercepted her and asked her to take a seat in an office until the surgeon arrived. The same Irish wolfhound from the day before explained the retriever had suffered bleeding within the brain as a complication from the surgery. He used terms like hemorrhage and cranial pressure, while Poodle sat and listened. She numbly nodded and didn't take notes. He was on life support and would never regain consciousness. The surgeon asked if she had power of attorney. Poodle asked to see Retriever. The nurse escorted Poodle back to Retriever's room. Poodle placed her paw across her mouth to hold in her pain. More patches of fur had been shaved from his body, including the top of his head. Tiny black pieces of thread jutted from his body where the surgeon had stitched him back together. Retriever's face was covered by a ventilator pumping oxygen into his chest that rose and fell, as though he were breathing on his own. Can he feel me standing beside him? She thought. Can he smell me? I don't know if I'm sorry or angry. I just feel empty. The nurse stood behind Poodle and explained that it was her decision. She could take her time. Retriever was comfortable. The nurse handed Poodle a clipboard with a bundle of forms tucked under the clip and left. Poodle pulled a chair by Retriever's side and placed her paw on his. I sat by his side all day and recounted our favorite stories one last time. At dinner parties, we would tell our perspective the story to our guests' amusement, each our own perspective. This time, I said his parts for him and laughed through my tears. How we met, our first date, and the first time he bought me a beautiful bunch of peonies. He looked so proud of himself for buying them until a bee flew out and landed on my nose. It didn't bother me that his face was one of pure panic. When I ran out of stories, I decided I didn't want the puppies to remember him this way. He was a fun, happy, and loving father. They didn't deserve to be subjected to this memory. She couldn't help but smile when she thought of the puppies, who would also likely complain of the smell of the hospital. They'd gotten that from Retriever. He would live on through them. Poodle unclipped the pen from the clipboard and signed the forms. She sat with Retriever and tried to recall any last stories. The first time I introduced him to my friends, we were at a restaurant and he spilled a bottle of wine. Instead of calling for the waiter, he lapped it up off the table until nothing was left. My friends looked on in horror as I laughed out loud. Poodle called for the nurse and handed her the clipboard. The nurse leafed through the pages. Poodle kissed Retriever and said goodbye. The nurse flipped off the switches above Retriever. The machine stopped beeping. The room was silent. As Poodle went to leave, she noticed an empty tub of pudding in the trash by Retriever's bed.
She paused,
stared at the item, and took a deep breath. Poodle composed herself and left to pick up the buckets.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you so much to Amy for reading that story with me. The inspiration for that story was based on a short story by Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote this really beautiful story about a man and a woman who meet at a bus stop and tells it from both sides' perspectives or points of view. I thought this would be an interesting take on the story of love. I think we all have a notional sense as to what love is and what marriage entails and the happy ever after. But nobody warns you that all love is conditional. In any relationship, in any marriage, there is always a barrier to it. And I thought that would be an interesting way to explore that theme. There's a few thank yous that I want to make before I get off stage. First and foremost to my loving wife, Andrea, who emceed tonight. She is my rock, she is my inspiration, she's the whole reason that this night has come together in the way that it has, so I couldn't be more proud to be your husband. To my editors, Todd Green and Sylvia Schwartz. I think Sylvia had to leave, but Todd, I think you're still here. I can't see because of the stage lights. But they are the people who know best of all how naive I was when I started this process. When I would turn over a draft to them and they would have to tell me, Matt, this is terrible. I really appreciated that criticism. So thank you so much to both of them and their partners for staying up on late night phone calls. To my podcasting team who helped produce this, they've done the sound and audio engineering tonight as well, so to Creative Marking Studios. I found these guys just with like a tag or a sign on the side of the road and called them up. I went into their office and they had this great pitch and a fresh pitch deck and things smelt a particular way. And I said to them, how many clients do you guys have? And they're like, not many. I'm like, great, I'm all in. Let's do this together. And they've been nothing but supportive and tremendous to work with. So thank you especially to Caesar and Laura. You guys have been great. To the Howland Centre, it's become my second home in Beacon. I was very lucky and fortunate to find the Hoboken Writing Group when we first moved back to the US and to find another group of writers. And I know many of you are here tonight. Thank you so much for your support and for helping critique me and giving the feedback that you have. It's been tremendously encouraging and I only want the best for this community. So thank you very much. To Barbara, who is our opener for tonight. It's really important for me personally to bring people along on any journey that I might have, and I think Barbara is a very talented writer, and so really glad that she got to read tonight. Finally, I was listening to a podcast last week that had Malcolm Gladwell in it, who is perhaps maybe the most famous author of non-fiction at the moment. And he told a story about when he released his first book, and he was the same age that I am now. And it was in an LA bookstore. He invited all of his friends and family, and 3 people showed up. Of those 3 people, 2 of them were strangers, and 1 of them was a friend's mum. His own friend didn't bother to show up. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone who has come along tonight. I really, really appreciate it. Just thank you. Like no words could possibly express what it means to have a dream like this come true. So thank you very much to each of you. I'll be at the back. We have a little bit of merchandise that we're selling here tonight. Please feel free to grab another drink. Come and have a chat with me. We are going to go for a drinks at a local bar afterwards, but thank you so much for your attention, everyone.